Hi, everybody. My name's Ken Vandermark, and you're listening to the Option Show presented by Experimental Sound Studio in Chicago every Monday night at 7 p.m. Central Time. Tonight we have a great guest, Junius Paul, a bassist based in Chicago, and he's got some brand new duo music with the pianist Justin Dillard, which we'll be looking at throughout the show. But thanks a lot for being here, Junius. It's great to see you. And actually, this is the first time we've met, and it's ironic it's this way, but I'm glad it's happening. So thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, Ken. And thank you to Experimental Sound Studio for just everything, for just having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's good to have you here. And we were talking a little bit before the broadcast started, and despite the shutdowns that have happened for music in the last almost exactly a year now that we're in March of 2021, it sounds like you've been super busy with things, very active. And one of the things you mentioned that was helpful for you during this period, just from an economic and also probably creative standpoint, is you received a 3 Arts grant. Could you talk a little bit about that and how it impacted you over the course of the last 12 months or so?
Absolutely. I'm extremely grateful to be a recipient of the 3 Arts grant for 2020, and myself, along with a number of incredible artists. And for me personally, it was definitely something that helped to not only sustain what I have going on, but also to help advance things. And it shows that being from Chicago and the Chicago area, that the people who are from the same place you're from, that they really do support you, and that they look out. And so it's definitely, like I said, in these times, and as you mentioned, is also in these times, it definitely has helped to sustain many things, and it's helped me to be in a little bit more position to try to build some things for the future, to not only help myself, but to help others in the music and artist community, which is really what it's all about. You know, we're here. I feel like whatever resources you get as an artist, I feel like it's our obligation to use those resources as much as we can to help the whole community.
Oh, that's really beautiful. When you talk about advancing your creative work, can you describe a little bit how you're thinking about that, or how that's already affected things?
Well, it's given me the opportunity to, during this time, you know, with not as many gigs and not as many opportunities to be making steady money, it's given me the opportunity to create comfortably still in this time, you know, and I think that's helped a lot. And I mean, that's not to say that it takes care of every single little thing, obviously, but it's just definitely helped to give me a little more stability so that I can not feel any type of anxiety about certain things, so that I can really just create. And eventually it's going to lead to just being able to finance more recording opportunities. And, you know, because there's a lot that I want to do as far as what I'm hearing and different musicians that I want to collaborate with. So it can definitely help in those areas as well in the future.
The record that you put out in 2019, ISM, is representative of that whole approach you're talking about right now in your work, where it's a real cross-section of different musicians, different lineups doing a number of pieces together, where you get a real feeling for, like, it's almost like, I don't know, you know, 4 or 5 different bands playing on that collection of music. How do you see what you're working on now, let's say, you know, 2020 going into 2021, the changes conceptually and, you know, aesthetically in your music in this period compared to 2019, because a lot has happened since that record came out in a lot of different ways. And I wonder how those changes may have impacted your creative work. Have you thought about that at all, or do you have a sense of what that might mean?
Certainly. Absolutely. I think with one of the things I wanted to do, for example, one of the things I wanted to do before the pandemic really changed a lot of things in 2020 was I wanted to do a number of configurations from the ISM album in different performance, scenarios, if you will. And, you know, so that could have been the trio that was on the record with myself and Tamika Reed and Isaiah Spencer, the quartet, which is, I call my regular working band, with Vincent Davis and Corey Wilkes and Justin Dillard, or the group with Rajiv Halim and Jim Baker and Isaiah. You know, there's all these different, Micaiah McCraven and Marquise Hill. That was a trio that created the song Paris, as well as some other things on the album. And so there's all these different, like you said, it's like 4 or 5 different bands on that album. You were very accurate in that observation. And so that was something I wanted to kind of work in 2020 and beyond. And then the pandemic shut a lot of things down. And so I really wasn't able to do a lot with any of those configurations. I did a couple of things with the quartet and the trio thing, but not really a ton. And so going forward, I think until things are able to really open up and I can not only write for maybe larger ensembles or do these different things, maybe I can do the smaller ensembles. But another thing I wanted to do was have like an ISM large ensemble where I have like, a majority, if not everybody, that's been on the project, like to be in this one ensemble, and I do some writing and conducting and all that stuff. So obviously something like that may have to be on hold because of the maybe financial restrictions of, budgets and different things, but definitely still working some of the smaller ensembles is something that I still want to do, and obviously still working the quartet as my regular band. And I still want to branch out on those things. And another thing I'm doing right now, which has been really cool, and it's consisted of only 2 people, which is cool, is the duo situation with Tamika Reed. We've been playing together for years and years through starting out through the ASEM and through D. Alexander's Evolution Ensemble. And then from there, various different situations. We recorded with Makai McCraven together and all that. And so there's always definitely been a musical chemistry. And so from that, we've always wanted to do something, like let's do something duo. I think that'd be really cool. And so during the pandemic, things just came together where we were able to really put some time into that and able to do a couple of gigs and shows. Like we did the Hyde Park Jazz Fest, and we recently did a recording at Constellation for the Havana Jazz Festival through Hot House. Oh, wow. And so, we've been able to do some things, and we've got some things coming up. So that's been a really cool, like, current situation that I've been, like, working with, along with some other people that I've been playing with, still with Vincent Davis and Justin and those cats, too.
Yeah, that sounds super exciting. I'd really love to hear you and the 2 of you play. That'd be amazing. And I got to say, as a fan of larger ensembles, the idea of putting together a large ISM ensemble, or how you term it, sounds super exciting. So I hope you're able to realize that, because that would be amazing. When you look at the lineup on that record and getting to hear them play in a big configuration would be incredible. So I hope you're able to pull that off. That'll be great. That'll be super
thank
cool.
you very much. Yeah, I would really love that. And of course, I've done a couple of pandemic recordings, virtual recordings with Roscoe Mitchell as well.
Oh, wow.
So we did one last year, and then we've got another one coming up soon. So of course, I can't leave Roscoe out.
No, I definitely wanted to talk to you about Roscoe. So we'll get to that after a little bit of music. You've got a bunch of duo stuff with Justin Dillard, the pianist, who's also on the ISM record. And we have a piece queued up, the first of 4. Could you talk a little bit about the material in this particular performance before we hear it?
Yeah, so the first tune that you're going to hear is entitled JG, and that was written by Muhal Richard Abrams off this album, and it's recorded on this 1975 album, Sight Song is the name of the recording, and that's actually a duo album with Malachi Favors. And it's one of my treasured albums. I love it's just one of my favorite albums ever. It's such a beautiful album, creative, sensitive album. And so JG is one of the songs from that album. And the reason it's entitled JG is it's dedicated to the great Chicago's own Johnny Griffin.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's amazing. I didn't know that. Okay, fantastic. Everybody, you're listening to the Option Series on Experimental Sound Studio's Quarantine Concert Programming. Talking now with Junius Paul. We're going to listen to some duo music with Junius and Justin Dillard. If you can donate, please do. All the funds will go to the musicians connected to the performance tonight. And I'd like to thank you for listening. And if you've got any questions for Junius, please put them in the chat, and they'll be forwarded to me, and we'll pass them over to Junius, who's been gracious enough to be willing to answer those queries. Okay, this is JG, Justin Dillard, and Junius Paul. Thanks for tuning in. Hi, everybody. You're going to hear some barking dogs in the background. I'm at home with three very lively animals right now. That was Junius Paul and Justin Dillard. A fantastic performance. It sounds really great. I'm unfamiliar with the original that was recorded by Richard Abrams and Malika Favors. I'm guessing that the original Mual played acoustic piano on it.
Yes.
And that keyboard fits the piece so well. That sound, it was like,
I love the sound that he used on that thing, man.
Oh
like,
man, it sounds
I think
perfect.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it just like really fits the mood of it, and amazing that the piece was dedicated to Johnny Griffin. He's one of my heroes. I grew up getting to see him play, and when he'd be on tour coming through Boston when I was a teenager, and his bands with Kenny Washington altered my DNA. That guy.
Wow.
So that was every time I get to hear and in a way see music I haven't encountered before, it makes me super, super happy. So thanks for the gift of that. It's totally made my week. And I know it's only Monday, but I have a feeling it's going to carry on to the rest of it as well.
Thank you.
You mentioned getting to work with Roscoe Mitchell before we went to the first piece. And speaking selfishly as a reed player, Roscoe Mitchell is one of my heroes. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about working with him, things you've learned from getting a chance to do that, just to be a fly on the wall and kind of get some insight from someone who's actually had a chance to do a bunch of music with him.
Oh, my goodness. Words can't describe the experience, truly. I've been able to work with Roscoe, and Don Moyer in the art, as far as Roscoe's groups, a little bit earlier than I started. I started playing with the Art Ensemble in February of 2017. My first gigs were at Cafe Alto in London. We had a 3-night run there. Yeah. And that was coming straight off of a tour with the Roscoe Mitchell Sextet. And that was with Vincent Davis and Tamika Reed and Mass Twift and Sylvia Bolin-Yazy and Roscoe and myself. And that was, we did, I think, five or six shows. And then Tamika, Maz, and Sylvia went to do a tour with Here and Now, with their trio. And Vincent went home, and then I went to London. Roscoe and I went to London from Ljubljana, Slovenia.
Oh, wow.
To do the Art Ensemble hits. And so, I my first musical encounters with Don Moyer, actually, also, speaking of the Art Ensemble, were years ago. I played with the Sun Percussion Ensemble in Chicago at the Hot House. And that had to be probably like 2003 or something like that.
Wow.
And so, he was still living in Chicago at the time. He now lives in France. And so I hadn't seen him for some time. And so, I kind of knew Roscoe through the years, actually seeing him, maybe overseas, running into him at a festival or maybe something in Chicago. And, we kind of, he knew who I was, I guess, just by seeing me, but didn't really know me like that. And I didn't really obviously know him like that either. And more and more, we were crossing paths. And the time came where, and Vincent Davis has a lot to do with it as well, because he's been working with Roscoe since the early 80s. And so, he would keep Roscoe up on, I guess my progress and things that where I was developing at. And, Roscoe would hear about these things. And so finally I got a call to do a recording with Roscoe, actually the tribute to Fred Anderson that we recorded at Constellation with Tamika Reed and Vincent Davis. And that was actually my first real hit with Roscoe. And the funny thing is, even before that, I'd done some stuff with him with the ACM, and then Dave Rimpus put something together at Elastic years back. But again, these were things where I was on the stage, but it wasn't like Roscoe calling me. And so, just to even have that call to do that recording with Tamika and Tamika and I say all the time, Tamika and I kind of came into the Roscoe camp together, because that was both of us, that was our first call to hit with Roscoe and his group. And so from there, I would just do some, things further, some trio stuff with Mike Reed, a couple more trio things with Vincent Davis, a few more things with trio things with Vincent Davis and Roscoe, actually. And from there, that led to the Sextet tour, which then from that went into the Art Ensemble. And so I've been able to work with Roscoe and Famadou Don Moyer in a number of settings now since about maybe 2015 on.
Wow. And
and
what's
it's
it
been
like
incredible.
when you're working with Roscoe? Let's say not only in the art ensemble, let's say a trio format with Vincent Davis, and you're playing Roscoe's pieces. I mean, getting into those and how he approaches like teaching them or working with them with an ensemble. What's that like? That approach, that process.
You know, it's really it opens your mind. I'll say for me, I'll speak personally. It's opened my mind to interpreting music and interpreting someone else's vision in new ways. Because the thing is, obviously, you have to know how to read these pieces, and most of them aren't easy.
Yes.
None of them are really easy because even maybe this one doesn't have a lot of notes, but that means you have to pay even more attention to the space and to the dynamics because obviously the tune isn't written to be easy. The tune is written, maybe it doesn't have a lot of notes because it's written to interpret this space even more or interpret silence or decay of certain instruments and sounds even more, just really getting into those things. And so everything, it all has a really, all of his music has these defined purposes. All of them do. But yet at the same time, if you know how to read them and interpret them in your own way, everything is open to interpretation. You know, it's like, I shouldn't say everything. Some things he wants you to like really read and interpret the way as written because there's a certain thing that he's hearing and he wants it to be realized. But even within that, within those things, I'll say they're still open to interpretation. You just have to know what you're doing within the music. If you know what you're doing within his music, then it's like you have the green light to do things as long as it's within the space of what's going on. You know, it's like you have to always be listening. You have to always be aware of what's happening. Always be watching Roscoe, of course, paying attention to Roscoe, following his lead, but yet not following at the same time, doing your own thing, having your own voice that's within this like vibration that's being created. You know, it's like there's really there's all these options and there's all this openness to it, but at the same time, you have to still know what you're doing within these options. It's not just a free for all where it's like, oh, I'm going to do this now, I'm going to do no. You have to have such an understanding of the concept of the music that though it may sound like there's all these crazy things going on, all of it is within the construct of everybody understanding what's going on within the music, everybody playing together, yet still being individual, and everybody knowing what they're doing and paying attention, being sensitive to all of these surroundings. And like I said, really paying attention to the openness and the silence as well. So it's a multifaceted thing, but I'll say the more I've been able to work with him, those things become clear. It's like an athlete when they say the game slows down as, you know, you play more like a NBA player and it's like, okay, I'm in my third year, my fourth year, whatever the case. And it's like, okay, the game is slowing down. I can see the game a little bit better as time goes by each time. It becomes like that with Roscoe, but at the same time, you can't get complacent and predict anything because it's not his music and his art is not to be predicted.
Yeah, he's so remarkable. I mean, the way you describe it, to me, it sounds like each piece has its own characteristics. Almost, it's not like there's a strategy that this is the way he makes things. Roscoe Mitchell has got like this piece, like you said, it might be a slower tempo, maybe less notes to play, maybe less superficially complicated, so to speak, but it's just as deep, just as complicated because it's about space and dynamics, like you say. And that piece maybe goes into that territory, and then you got a piece that deals with velocity and more kinds of vibrant energy as opposed to more stasis. So is that true? Do you feel like you have to go into each piece into that zone, consider those parameters, and if you dig into that, then the leeway comes because you understand what the necessary components are that have to be realized. And if those are touched upon, then the piece is actually pretty free in a way. Like you have freedom within it. Okay.
Right. You have freedom within it. And even though it may start out as not a lot of notes, maybe the piece, you can't restrict to where the piece will lead to. Maybe it will lead to something that becomes more complex, maybe not. It just all depends on where it goes, and you have to constantly be in the music at all times and in the moment. And that's something that I'll credit Roscoe for not doing and teaching me as well not to do, is not to get caught up in, like you say, superficial complexity. Because there are some times where it's like it's like, I want to compose fast notes or play fast notes just for the sake of playing fast notes. I think when you get to a lot of elements, I'll say not all the time, but I do hear it, especially in creative music, where sometimes it does sound like, okay, maybe this is just a lot of notes being played. Okay, what is the real purpose behind this? Is this just noise, or is this really, it's like, I think that, and just to get a little deeper into it, I think sometimes that's where creative music can get a little bit confusing for people, because you still, even though you may be playing fast notes or slow notes or anything like that, you still have to play music. It's just like if you're playing Aretha Franklin or playing Jim Croce or anything, it could be any space. You still have to make the people feel something. And if you're just up there like, I'm just going to play a bunch of fast notes because it's cool, that's where that superficial complexity comes in. And that's the one thing that we try our best to steer clear of. And if you look at even going back to the art ensemble, that's the one thing that they completely steered clear from, was that superficial complexity that you talk about. They didn't play fast or slow just to do it. Every single thing had a storyline, and every single nuance of the performance or the recording session, all of it had a specific purpose. And that's why when you listen to those records and you see those performances on YouTube, or even you see the art ensemble perform now, it's like Aretha said, we try to, the art ensemble for 50 plus years has tried to give the people something that they can feel. And I think that's what has helped to separate them from a lot of different groups and entities.
And I think to the audience deserves credit, because I think that they can recognize that, even if they're not schooled in the background. Like maybe they don't even have a Roscoe Mitchell record, just to keep it to Roscoe. But they come to a concert, you guys are playing, they can feel and register the discipline and musicality, as opposed to like maybe going to another trio with saxophone, bass, drums, just to make it up, and they're just trying to like be flashy or just whatever. You know what I mean? It's not about music. It's about this superficial complexity idea, or trying to impress for the sake of impressing, as opposed to the music needs it. Like you talked about, playing with Roscoe, maybe the piece in its initial conception might be slower, more stasis, more about dynamics, but then it could go anywhere.
Exactly.
If it needs to go there. If it needs to go there. And that freedom only comes with the sensibility, the musicality. And I think that audiences really can register that. And if they know the music well, they maybe register on more levels. But when you're people know when it's fake. You know what I mean? I think
and Roscoe can tell, Roscoe can tell the smallest inkling of when you're bullshitting. It's like Roscoe can just immediately pick up on it, man. I'm serious, man.
I'm sure you are.
It's amazing, man. But it keeps you honest as a musician,
Yeah.
And I think that's a staple of Chicago. If you look at the history of Chicago music and Chicago creative music, great black music through the years, that's been the history of great black music, is not only playing this music, but really telling our story.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's part of the narrative with the music. It's all combined into one. I wanted to keep going on because I love talking about music so much, obviously. But you play acoustic bass, also electric bass, and there are people who play acoustic bass and they have an electric bass. You know what I mean, or vice versa. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
But you're obviously very devoted to both instruments, and I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about how they're different as instruments, how you might approach them differently, because there really are two very different animals. They're two different things. And how do you think about that, or do you see there's a lot of overlap, or what's your thought about that?
It's a great question, because I feel like it's an approach thing, and so the way I try to approach it, which keeps me more unified in the concept, like I try to live by the concept of like bass is bass. And so it can be manifested in so many forms. For example, one of my biggest bass influences, along with the great bass guitarist and double bassist and just bass instrument players of various bass instruments from around the world, Stevie Wonder's Left Hand is like one of my biggest influences. That Moog bass sound that he just has in those early 70s and even later on in the 80s, some of those recordings, man, it's just amazing, amazing stuff. And so I say all that to say that bass is bass at the end of the day, be it key bass guitar, double bass, guimbre, could be anything, man. And so, like, you know, you have a bass classical guitar. There's so many different bass flute, man. There's so many. And so with that premise, I try to incorporate more of a unified approach when it comes to electric bass and double bass, because again, bass is bass, and so it's about. I feel like it's about interpretation. Like, what do you want? What bass sound do you want to be interpreted in this piece that you're playing, in this expression that you're about to emote? Like, what bass sound are you looking for? And so if that's an electric bass sound, then that's what it goes for. I've been blessed to do, I'll say, numerous situations with electric bass with Roscoe and the Art Ensemble and various other creative music situations, as well as, you know, gospel and R&B. I mean, a bunch of different stuff. And so it just all depends. I've been able to also play double bass in gospel music and in R&B, not just jazz, if you will, or, you know, other, like, I've done hip hop gigs with upright bass. And so it just really all depends on the sound that you're looking for. Physically, definitely two different animals. That is less of a unified approach, because, you know, the double bass is such a physically demanding instrument. It's big, it's tall, and it demands a lot of your hands and just like really your entire physical being. It really does. You have to have certain posture from your head to your toes to make sure that things are properly aligned so that you're not causing any physical ailments over time. And so, yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. Same with electric bass, but electric bass is physically not as demanding. They're both monsters as far as learning the instruments in their own right, because it's like, you know, it's an instrument, so there's endless possibilities. And so, you know, I try to approach any instrument like that, you know, including the human voice. Like, you can't limit yourself to the possibilities of what an instrument can do, even though obviously you're not going to try to get an upright sound with electric bass. You know, that part of it, the basic stuff. But as far as just like the phrasing and how you speak on the instrument, it's just like anything else. If you expand your vocabulary in any language, you can speak it better. And so that's what I really try to go for in both instruments, is trying to speak on each instrument. I don't want to say well, but just be able to let my voice come out clearly on each instrument. You know, whatever I'm hearing up here or in my heart and my spirit, then I just want it to come out clearly on each instrument.
Yeah. No, that's the goal. If you're a multi-instrumentalist, to have, like, you know, you say expand the vocabulary. You know, I play like multiple horns, and it's like you got to work on them. You know what I mean? Like, even if the fingering might overlap in some places on the bass clarinet and clarinet, you know, they're totally different animals. They're totally different. They demand different things, and then they lead to different things. You know, what I learn on one instrument sometimes translates over to another, or they have a different kind of, I don't know, personality. And that's why you reach for it, you know. And that's why I go for, you know, the tenor instead of the baritone sometimes, because that's going to speak what I need it to say, you know, better than another horn. So it sounds to me, it's like somewhat similar to what you're talking about the acoustic bass versus electric, that there's overlap, but there's also very strong characteristics within those that make them unique for you.
Certainly.
Yeah. You talked about doing that tour before hooking up with the Art Ensemble at Cafe Auto in London a few years ago. And in the group you were traveling with was the great bassist Silvia Bolognese. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about being in a band with two bassists, because that's not common. Like, it's pretty common for me to be in a group with another horn player, a saxophone player, let's say, but it's not every day that, you know, you've got a band with two bassists. And I've got to say, like, I always loved the group with Ornette's Court group with David Eisenson and Charlie Hayden, and the way they were so different and they would navigate around each other. When you work with Silvia in that context, is there a way you approach it, or do you kind of play the way you play and you just hear it and you find your way through it? Because obviously you could be overlapping a lot in a way that could cancel each other out a bit. So you must be very conscious about what's going on.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're always listening to each other, constantly paying attention to what's going on as far as the ensemble, obviously, but constantly listening to one another. And I think the entire string section, if you will, especially like when you talk about Roscoe Sextet with Mast, Tamika, Sylvia, and myself, like it was, yes, there were two basses there, but it was really more like this is a string section. And we tried to take more of that approach. And I think that helps a lot too, because now it's not just about the basses listening to each other. It's about all the strings listening to each other. And it's kind of the same thing with the art ensemble in a way, because there's three bassists in the art ensemble. It's myself, Sylvia Bolagnese, and Jaribu Shaheed. And of course, you know, Jaribu's been in the Roscoe camp, in the art ensemble camp for many years. He was actually the first bassist once Malachi Favors McGusted passed away. Jaribu took that chair for a while, you know, while the art ensemble was continuing on. And so, you know, he's been a longtime veteran of that sound and just the configuration. And so it's obviously a larger configuration now with the art ensemble, where we have more strings and there's more basses and more percussionists. And, you know, it's really it's a cool sound. And so with that, now with three basses, there really has to be a lot of listening going on. And I think it just opens you up, you know, because you have to be listening to the ensemble, paying attention to Roscoe, paying attention to Moye and what's going on between all these different factions. But at the same time, being cognizant maybe on this particular piece. And also when Roscoe writes out pieces or Moye writes out pieces, both of them as composers give clear parts of what they want each bass to do. I want you to kind of stay low. I want you to hold down the bass line, hold down the groove. I want you to play this accompanying part. I want you to play this accompanying part. Maybe you're accompanying the other accompanies. Maybe you've got your own complete bass part that's, you know, this its own thing. And so as composers, they both do a great job of kind of handing out the roles, if you will. And so that helps us when we get into our creative spaces where we're getting off the page, if you will. That helps us to define our roles as well as like what we're doing, because it could change with each song. One song we may all arco and it's in different ranges. Another song there may be some unison lines, or one may pizzicato here, another arco here, and then there may be another piece where we decide how these sounds are going to come out, you know. And so yeah, it's constant decision making. Sometimes it's kind of like half and half, where we make these decisions in rehearsal, and then there's other times where we make these decisions on the fly. And so it really does take a lot of sensitivity and listening to each other and being able to agree a lot of times on the fly and not get caught up in like, well, this is that and this is that and that. No, it's like, you know, we understand certain roles, but at the same time, you do have to be able to agree and just come together and think about the whole of the section and the whole of the ensemble. And just really, even though it's within a 3 bass or 2 bass section, still always implementing ensemble thinking.
Yeah, that's a great phrase. Implementing ensemble thinking in the moment, like not only dealing with what's you've been given as a composition, those parts and maybe directions and guidelines, but you're in it and you've got to hear the big picture. It's ensemble playing. You know, that's a beautiful phrase. I was wondering, I mean, you brought it up a couple of times, this idea of, you know, getting directions from a composer, whether it's Don Moye or Roscoe Mitchell, and those parameters enabling a freedom. Like if you understand the parameters, you understand the nature of the piece, then you can be pretty free within that, or very free. And then that's part of the goal. Like you're given, they're handing that responsibility to you. Like understand it, and now it's yours. Like be part of this ensemble thinking, right? Is it? Do you see it that way? Do you find that those guidelines give you more freedom, or do you feel that they're just restricting?
Well, I don't ever view it as restricting, but I feel like the freedom isn't always, I guess, what one may sometimes think of as freedom. Like I can just do whatever I want. Sometimes you're given the freedom to have. It's like you still have the freedom to. If the situation calls for you to kind of stay maybe in an ostinato thing or not move around so much, that's a freedom too. And so it's like the freedom, I guess for lack of a better term, I'll call it you have the freedom of restriction also, where you can also, with this freedom of like, yeah, okay, maybe I can do whatever I want at times, you still like you said, there's a responsibility with that freedom. And so when you think about the bigger picture of what that freedom is, you are really free. You're not just free to go crazy. You're free to also, like I said, if there's a need to maybe not do so much, or if there's a need to this or that, like whatever the case is, it is your freedom to also be able to make those decisions. Because really the freedom, I think the bigger aspect of that freedom that you're talking about is being given, in a way, you're being given your keys to your portion of the car. Mm-hmm. If that makes any sense at all.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. And so with that, okay, here are these keys, like you got them now. Mm-hmm. And so that's really what the freedom is. The freedom is that freedom is, in a bigger picture, being entrusted to make the right decisions as an artist in these moments. You're not just being entrusted to have great chops or to be able to read well and this and that. You're entrusted to be able to make the proper musical decisions at various times. And that's really what the freedom is. And so there's a lot to that freedom. But if you know how to, it's like any other freedom, if you know really how to handle it and know how to use it in the right ways, because it's still your freedom, then it's like it can make beautiful music. The freedom extends to like, okay, you're free to be an ensemble player. Now, in your freedom, you can choose to be this individual player, but that's not going to mesh with what the ensemble is doing right now. And so again, going back to ensemble thinking, it's like, yeah, you're given this freedom that we talk about, but at the same time, the freedom comes with a certain level of discernment that you must have.
Yeah. And do you feel like in your own work as a leader, things that you've learned from working with someone like Roscoe Mitchell or all these other, artists, has that translated in the way that you teach your music to other musicians or get them to try to think about it? Or do you have a different? So this kind of feeds into. So it's a way of thinking for you that you've kind of adopted from learning from the master, so to speak.
Certainly, because it's the thing I try to teach the musicians that I work with is, my band and also younger musicians that I mentor and things like that, or if they have questions or anything. I try to, along with. For the younger musicians, try to bring out of them the highest skill level that they can bring out of themselves. Also, one of the things that I learned from the masters is finding, of course, being an ensemble player, as we talked about, but having your individual voice within the ensemble. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes you unique. Mm-hmm. It's like for example, going back to the art ensemble, they didn't hire me to sound like Malachi Favors. As incredible as Malachi is, and was and is, Malachi is Malachi. You can't duplicate Malachi. Like he's not to be duplicated, and so that's not what they look for. They look for Junius Paul within this framework, within this sound. And that's really the thing. And so I try to teach that to the younger musicians. Study, learn the greats of all types of music and study them and try to get with as many cats as you can that really know what they're doing, and study with them and ask a bunch of questions and just, put the time in, have fun with what you're doing, all that stuff. I try to implement those same things within my ensembles, like you were asking. That same thing of like, yeah, we're going to learn the music that I have, but at the same time, I'm giving you this freedom. I'm giving you this freedom to be yourselves within the ensemble, because that's why I hire a Justin and a Corey. That's why I hire a Justin and a Corey and a Vincent, and everybody else that I have really on the album, is because like I want my music to be played, but at the same time I'm giving everybody this freedom to be themselves as artists within the music. And so like the bulk of the album was actually different configurations that I have, mostly recorded live, some studio, but mostly recorded live. And none of the music, except for some of the studio stuff that I did with the quartet, everything else that was recorded live, including some of the quartet stuff, was live too. Like literally it was like I gave a vision of the concept before we started, and then it was green light, and we just went.
Wow.
I thought it made for some beautiful music. Yeah, because along with, again, like I say, when it comes to the younger cats and myself too, still learning, obviously, and still trying to grow, studying the greats and studying what they did and trying to figure out some of the things that they did so that you can take those things and interpret them on your own. You do those things so that you can have your own sound, take all these different things that have been poured into you and that you've discovered and you stumbled upon and all that, and you pour those into yourself and what you're doing. And from there, you just continue to even expand that. And so I'm all about, like I said, learning your history and what you're doing, but using that to create something new within yourself that just continues to create upon itself.
Yeah, because the people that we love to listen to, they contributed that. You know what I mean? They made that. And so the best way we can perpetuate that growth is to do the same thing in our own way.
Exactly.
So it's like the strongest thing possible is for you to be who you are, playing with the art ensemble, not trying to replicate something that Malachi did, because he did that. That gap will never be filled in,
Right. And that's out of respect to him. Not trying to sound like him. It's a respect thing. Exactly. I just saw somebody had a question.
Oh yeah. And then we'll get to some more music. Okay, this is what is uniquely special to you about each ensemble on the ISM recording?
I think each ensemble tells a different story almost of my life, if you will. Like, for example, the trio with Tamika and Isaiah, I've been playing with both of them for a long time, like since the Velvet Lounge. A lot of this stuff goes back to the Velvet Lounge and what the freedom, you talk about the freedom that Fred Anderson was able to give us as young musicians at the Velvet Lounge, which really helped the Chicago scene as a whole. And coming up with other musicians such as like Ernest Dawkins and Vincent Davis, and coming up through the AACM and Ann Ward and Dee Alexander, and just so many others in Chicago that have really, helped me along the way personally, to be honest with you. And it's like, Kahil Elzabar is another one. There's just a number of cats. And so it's like all of those things were able to go into my story. And so you look at that trio with Isaiah and Tamika, that goes way back for me. Justin, the quartet with Justin and Corey and Vincent, that goes, again, back to the Velvet Lounge. I've been playing with them. That's been my quartet for a number of years. And I've been able to learn so much playing in Corey Wilkes' band through the years and playing with Justin in various situations and being mentored by Vincent through the years. And so all the, that's another story. And then I've got the group with Shanta Narula and Irvin Pierce and Scott Hesse and Isaiah. That's another story because it's like you've got Irvin, who I met a little bit later, but he was still really young when I met him. And now we tour together with Micaiah McCraven. And so that's another story. Shanta Narula is another person that I met a long time ago. And I always had respect for what she was doing. And so Scott Hesse is somebody I met through the Velvet Lounge playing with Vincent Davis and the Percussion Plus band. And so all these things, Micaiah and Marquise, I tour with both of their bands. And now that they're able to do things with me, we did a trio thing. A part of my record release thing after the record came out, we did a thing with in New York, in Brooklyn in January, and it was a really cool thing. And so that's another thing that I'm talking about as far as extending these ISM ensembles and taking them different places and doing different things. And so that these are all examples of like, these are not just stories of like, ooh, I like this cat, I want to put this musician together with that musician, I think that'd be cool. No, all these configurations on my album have to do with like stories and experiences of my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and presenting that through musical means. That's really beautiful. Well, let's listen to some more music because you got 3 pieces in a clip coming up now, and then you do a kind of a sum up in some talking at the end. It's about 10 to 8. So I always like ending on the music and letting the music speak fully too. So I want to thank you now so much for being on the show, Junius. It's really been a pleasure to talk to you. Amazing to hear even the one piece so far. I'm looking forward to these next 3 pieces with Justin Dillard. If you can, please donate. All the money goes to the musicians on the shows, as they always do for the quarantine concerts. Big thanks to Ralph Loza for helping with the tech tonight. Thanks to Tim Daisy and Andrew Klinkman for curating with me on the series, and of course to Experimental Sound Studio for all they're doing for music, keeping things going during this trying time. Total pleasure, Junius. So many great ideas. I've learned a ton just listening to you, and I'm looking forward to hearing some more music. Stay tuned, everybody, and huge thanks. Junius Paul, amazing bassist and a wonderful person. Thank you for being here, man.
Thank you.
Okay.
This is Carson. Yes. Okay. such as? We'll start in three small instruments, three into this thing, that vibe, and then
Let me sit down.
we'll start the, in that way we'll start the instrument out at probably like 1.5, 2, and then we can build.
So start the small instruments at 3.
Small, yeah, so we can like, because I don't want to spend too much time here.
For sure.
You know, we'll get into here, start a thing, and like I say, the instruments will probably start like 1.5, 2, and build from there.
Oh, we can actually get back to the.
Yeah, so just, I want to give that a little bit more time.
For sure.
I feel like we fast time already ready to go.
One second to sit.
Sound like dun, 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 dun. Ready? Well, let me get more like in this type of view. Ready? And. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's Justin Dillard on keyboards and percussion. My name is Junius Paul on basses and percussion. And the first tune that we did was entitled JG, written for Johnny Griffin by the great Muhal Richard Abrams, originally performed by Muhal Richard Abrams and the great Malachi Favors. The second tune was an original entitled Cresta, an original of mine. The third, fourth, and fifth pieces were all creative, original pieces written by the two of us spontaneously. Thank you very much for listening and watching.